Hi everyone, this is just a quick video taking you through question 5 of paper 2 for the English language specification. Now this question is going to help you through looking at question 5, how to practice your writing, specifically how to write an article for the GCSE exam. If you are studying for GCSE English this year, then you may already be aware that the article is what you're going to have to do for question 5. So we're going to have a series of lessons now looking at the different questions that they've used over the past few years and just getting to grips really of how to approach each one. Before we look at the question, let's think about what do you really need to know for this question and how can we best revise for it to make sure we're getting the maximum marks possible. So the first thing that I'd like to bring to your attention is that you need to be able to express your viewpoint on a specific topic or theme. Now we don't know specifically the topic that's going to come up, but it is going to be related to the other 4 questions within your paper. So it might be a good idea to have a look at those other questions, so it will help generate a few ideas about the topic in general. But a lot of teachers do tell you to go to question 5 first. So it's important that you think about what works best for you, and also it doesn't hurt just to have a scan over the paper as a whole just to see the kind of topics or themes that they're talking about. Next one then. So use persuasive techniques to support your ideas. So it's all well and good being able to express your ideas, but if they're not supported by appropriate techniques, then it's an easy way to lose out on some marks. Write in a clear, coherent manner. So whenever you're writing, make sure that you are sticking to 1 point per paragraph, and that is just a really good way to make the message come across really effectively to your audience. If you start jumbling all your ideas up together and you start cramming them all together in the same paragraph, then it's going to be really difficult for them to understand the point that you're trying to make. And the final one for this one is use SPAG effectively. So when we say SPAG, we mean spelling, grammar and punctuation. So you get 16 marks for SPAG for this question, so it's really important that you use it effectively. So that means that, are you using the high level punctuation? Are you using things like your colons, your semicolons, your parentheses? Because if you're not, then you're potentially going to miss out on a few marks there as well. So how do we need to revise for this? A lot of the time, teachers will tell you that you need to do so many hours of revision a week, and that is important because the exams are coming up, but it's important that you make sure that whatever you're revising is actually aimed towards a certain goal. So if you're going to actually revise for question 5, have a question to focus on, like the one we're going to look at in this video, and you don't necessarily have to spend full 45 minutes having a go at this. If you've been at school all day and then you come back and revise, mentally it's going to be a little bit difficult to get all of that done. So think about what you're capable of. Even if you just have a go at a paragraph or 2 paragraphs a night, by the end of the week then you should have a full question 5 response that you can go through, start seeing where to improve and how to develop that response further. A good thing to do is to familiarise yourself with the past papers. Now we're going to be looking at all of the past papers over the next coming weeks. Specifically, we're going to focus on articles for question 5 because that's going to be a main focus for you guys this year. Understand how to write in the appropriate form for an article. So whenever we're talking about the form of an article, it means how do you need to lay it out? What kind of organisational features do you need to use? And the main ones for this are using headlines and subheadings. Spend time developing your writing. Something that a lot of students get in the habit of doing is they tend to write something like a typical question 5 and then they leave it alone. They don't kind of come back, they don't review it. But how are you going to really track your progress if you're not getting it marked, having feedback on that work and seeing the areas where you need to improve? So if you are practicing your question 5, I'd advise you to keep hold of all of your revision to see where you can actually improve and see if you actually are improving. Because if you're not, then maybe something needs to change in the way that you're revising for your exam. Last one then. So revise in small windows of time and review your learning and identify the gaps in your knowledge. So anywhere between 10 minutes to 30 minutes is absolutely fine. It doesn't always have to be hours and hours sat in front of a desk, always focusing on the same thing over and over again, because mentally that's not going to be very beneficial. Try to set yourself small tasks. Try to have a clear aim for your revision to make sure you know what you want to achieve. Look at the question below and attempt the challenges that follow. So this is the question that we're going to be focused on today. It's a very typical one that you get for question 5. So it says, homework has no value. Some students get it done for them, some don't do it at all. Students should be relaxing in their free time. Write an article for a broadsheet newspaper in which you explain your point of view on this statement. So the first thing I'd like you to do is just to read through this question carefully and try to identify the TAP of the question. Now what we mean about this is the topic, the audience and the purpose. And this is just a really good thing to stop and ask yourself about before you jump into writing the exam, so that you really know what you have to focus on in your writing. The next one, the super challenge, is I'd like you to think back about all of the different techniques that you've covered during your English course and think what kind of techniques would you need to use to respond to this question. And then a good thing to do as well is to mind map 3 or more ideas to help respond to this question. We say 3 or more ideas because you're going to want at least 3 main paragraphs within your writing, as well as your introduction and conclusion. So as a bare minimum, you'll need 3 ideas for this one as well. Class feedback. Check your answers against the ones below. So hopefully now you would have had a bit of time to go over the question, really try to break it down and really try to understand what it is that you need to be focusing on in your writing. So the first thing then, the challenge that we had was to identify the TAP of the question. So first of all, the topic is the importance of homework. The audience, so who are we aiming the writing at? These will be people who typically read a newspaper, and generally that tends to be older people, so adults. And the purpose. The purpose says to explain your point of view. So a lot of the time with these questions, you might agree partially, you might completely agree 100%. It's entirely up to you. It's about expressing your own view and your own opinion. The super challenge. So you need to use persuasive techniques. These can be things like DeForest techniques and the other ones that you've learned during your course. And then finally, the mega challenge. For this question, these are just some of the ideas that I came up with myself. So I'd probably spend 1 full paragraph talking about the pressure that students are under on a daily basis. Now typically most people sitting GCSE English are also sitting alongside a lot of other exams. So the fact that they are doing multiple courses at once, the fact that their main decisions within their careers and where to go next in regards to future study, this is all a lot of pressure, and I'd really kind of focus on that in one of my paragraphs. Another idea I had is that there's really an important thing about growing up, that you need to spend time with your friends and your family. That is very important, even integral to how we develop as people. And really, if we're spending all our time doing massive homework, we're going to really neglect that side of our lives and that side of our development. And then finally, homework can help identify and develop the gaps in our knowledge. So these aren't necessarily the ones that I'm going to 100% use in my writing, but I'm just coming up with quickly a few ideas that I could use in there. And you can see there that some of them are quite positive towards homework, whereas some generally sound a bit more negative as well. If you're not aware of this, TAP, the topic, audience and purpose, that is a really important acronym to know, especially when you come to look at your question 5, and it's always the first thing that you should think about when you first read your question. Look at the techniques below and attempt the challenges that follow. So on the previous part of the video, we were talking about the kind of techniques that you need to attempt this question and to really write it effectively. So these ones, the main ones, are DeForest techniques. Now these might change slightly depending on your teacher, but generally all of these techniques are going to be really good and really effective within your writing. So you can see there on the left hand side we have our DeForest techniques. We have direct address, which is where you're speaking directly to the audience using words like you or us. Alliteration, that is the repetition of a single letter that's being repeated, and that often causes us to emphasize certain words or phrases within the writing. Fact, now this one can be quite a strange one because you're not necessarily going to know loads of different facts about the topic that you're given, but what you can do is you can make it up. It's all about how you present the information. So if you said something like, it is a fact that doing homework helps people to achieve higher grades, then because I've said it's a fact, I've presented that information as factual information, then I'll still get a mark in regards to that. An opinion, so this is where you're expressing your own point of view on the topic. Rhetorical question, so this is the question that doesn't really justify a response, but what you really want to do is to use these to help engage the reader and to get them thinking about the point that you're trying to make. Repetition. Now this is very important, so it's something that you can use if you have a key phrase or key idea. It might be worthwhile to repeat it at the start of each paragraph or somewhere within your writing multiple times to reinforce a really important or key message to your audience. Emotive language. So this is where we use words that invoke an emotional response from the reader. So it's not as simple as just saying happy or sad. It's words that will actually trigger an emotional reaction from the reader. Statistics, so this is where you use numerical data to support your idea. Some teachers would also change this to probably have second person, but really as long as you're using a few of these techniques, that would be absolutely fantastic. And the final one is a triplet or rule of three. This is also called a group of three as well. All means the same thing. This is where you've got three words or statements that are working towards a common goal. So for example, you might say that homework is fun, engaging, and helps you to achieve better things in life, would be a good example of a triplet. So what I'd like you to think about now is I'd like you to have a look at those DeForest techniques and just think, how confident are you with using these techniques in your writing? It's all well and good of saying you know your DeForest techniques, but do you naturally use them in your writing? Or is it somewhere that you might need to improve just to get into that habit of using them on a more natural basis? Super challenge. What other techniques could you use that aren't included in this acronym? So even though this is a really effective acronym to use and to help guide your writing, it's not the only techniques you can use. So you can use other things like a hyperbole, for example, which is like over exaggeration to really drill home the point you're trying to make. Another good thing for you to do if you've got a little bit of time is just to write an example for each DeForest technique to help plan your response for the exam question. And this just ensures that in your writing you're actually showing the examiner that you're going to use some of the techniques that we know to be effective. Okay, so planning those out already kind of alleviates a little bit of the pressure and some of the stresses before you actually go ahead and do the exam. Class feedback. Look at the plan below. Were you able to come up with ideas for each technique? So what we're about to see then is I've thought about my DeForest techniques, and for each one of these techniques I've wrote a sentence to try and use towards my argument about the idea about homework and how important it is. So the first one is my direct address. So you need to make the right choice for your education, and it's that word you that is really driving home the point and shows a good example of direct address. The next one, alliteration. Homework can be long and loathsome. So a lot of people will think that if you have a word like and in between the two words that it won't count as alliteration, but it still will, as long as we don't have too much of a gap, because it still affects the way that I read it out, and you can hear the emphasis on my voice as I say those two alliterative words there. So homework can be long and loathsome, and it kind of gives us a bit more emphasis on that word there as well. The next one, a fact. Homework isn't always the most important thing in a student's life. Now, as I wrote that one, I was thinking about the ideas that I came up with previously. So I was thinking about the fact that, it's important for learners to spend time with their friends and their family. So I could use a fact to try and help support that idea for that point. Opinion. I feel like homework is a waste of time. Now, that's not my personal opinion. That is just something I'm writing because I need to give an example of an opinion. And it's actually a really good example of saying, it doesn't matter really whether you personally care about the topic that you're asked to write about, but you need to kind of pretend that you do, right? So you need to express opinions that show passion and show enthusiasm. Because if you don't, if your writing comes off a bit bland, a bit dull, like you really aren't that keen about it, then how is anyone else going to really interact with it and be engaged in what you're trying to say to them? Next one, rhetorical question. So who doesn't enjoy their time at home? We've got emotive language. Students suffer under a mountain of homework. So the fact that we're saying that they suffer is quite emotive because it's making us feel sorry for people in those situations. You can see there as well that I've missed out the other R, and that's simply because although repetition is very, very important, it's something I'll probably think about a little bit more as I go further into my writing rather than necessarily get down in my plan right now. S. So I've gone with a statistic here. 80% of students suffer mentally due to homework. Now, just the same as a fact, I'm not sure if this is a fact or not, but it sounds realistic, right? It sounds like it might be something that might actually be a true fact. So it's something that I can actually use because it actually sounds quite realistic as well. And the final one, my triplet, homework is stressful, annoying, and a waste of time. Again, this isn't my point of view, but it's simply me trying to think about how can I use those techniques effectively to help get the best mark possible. Look at the example below and evaluate the effectiveness of the response. So as you can see here in the right hand corner, we're also going to have a little bit of teacher's feedback. So the response we're looking at was written by a real student, and the feedback was given by the actual examiner for a proper exam as well. So it's a very realistic example that we're looking at now. So the example says then, homework plays a vital role in the lives of young people as they learn, develop and become valuable members of the community. It is something we all have had to do. However, is it really something we should be forcing on our young people? Isn't it perhaps more important to spend the precious time they have after school by enjoying themselves with their friends and family? It is a fact that 90% of students feel anxiety when faced with homework. Let me get straight to the point. Does homework really have a value, or are we preventing young people from living their best lives? So now what we're going to do, we're going to look at the typical kind of feedback you might receive from your teacher, and we're going to use the format of what went well first of all to see what went well in this extract and actually where the marks would be awarded. So the teacher has said, the candidate has produced an effective introduction that relates back to the question. So they're talking about what they mean to talk about, and they've actually started to use a few techniques as well, which makes it quite effective. So again, as we mentioned with the techniques there, some DeForest techniques have been used to support ideas. Ideas are clear and coherent. That means it's making sense and it's not going off on a mad tangent about something else. They've used some sophisticated vocabulary. And now we're going to look at the EBI, so even, better, if. Now something to look out for when you actually have feedback from a teacher is the language actually needs a little bit of further understanding. So when it says words like some DeForest techniques, what's implied there is that they've used a few, but maybe could use more. So whenever they use words like some, it's saying that yes, they've used a few and that would award them a few marks, but ultimately to get the higher grade, we do need to see a range of DeForest techniques or a range of sophisticated vocabulary, especially if we're thinking about getting up there with a level 8 or a level 9. So, even better if. You must write in paragraphs to achieve higher than a level 2. Now, the teacher has marked this on the assumption that this paragraph is all that they have wrote, so we don't actually know if they've written paragraphs because there's only really one. Okay, so it might sound a little bit silly or a little bit obvious, but a lot of people do forget to write in paragraphs, and that's an easy way to lose yourself some marks. If you don't do some of the more basic or obvious skills within English, then you won't be able to achieve the higher grade, even if you've used a lot of techniques or punctuation effectively. Use organizational features for an article, so e.g. headline and subheading. Okay, so this is a really important point. Now for those of you that are doing your GCSEs this year, you've got to write an article when you're doing your question 5 for paper 2, so you need to make sure that you're including your headline and a subheading, because those are the main kind of things that we expect to see in an article. Okay, if you'd like to attempt this question yourself, you're more than welcome to use this example as a starting point. It is quite successful, as we can see there from the what went well, but it might be a good idea just to build on it and make sure that we're definitely going to get 5 paragraphs, because that's really the amount that you need to be producing within those 45 minutes. Using everything you have learned, use the success criteria to respond to the exam question. So again, this is the exact same question that we went through a few minutes ago, and on the right hand side now we have a success criteria. Now this is a really helpful thing to use just to make sure that you include in the key elements that you need to remember to use in your writing. So in your response you should write in the appropriate form for an article. So if you remember the feedback we just talked about for that example, you need to make sure that there's a headline and a subheading. Now the headline doesn't have to be the most catchy thing in the world, as long as you're showing the examiner that you know that this is the kind of form that you need to present your writing in. Write in a clear, coherent manner. A good way to make sure you're doing this is just have it very clear in your head that you're only going to stay on one point per paragraph. If you'd like to make another point, then that means you need to change paragraph because it's shifted the focus. So you'd need a different paragraph for a different point. Use a range of DeForest techniques to support your ideas. So again, if you think back to the feedback that the student had from his example, it said they'd used some DeForest techniques, but in order to get the higher mark, we need to make sure that a range of DeForest techniques are used there. They also need to make sure that they're thinking about those broader techniques as well that we've also discussed. Use discourse markers and paragraphs to structure your writing. So when we're talking about discourse markers, we're thinking about things like firstly, secondly, thirdly, and in conclusion. These are discourse markers that allow us to help sequence our writing, and you also have ones that will help us to contrast ideas, so ones like however, although, or ones that build onto it like in addition. Right, so they're very important and they really help us to structure our writing and kind of tell us which direction you're going to go with it as well. And the final one, use a range of punctuation and sentence structures. This is an area that's often overlooked by a lot of students, and the reason is because we're so eager and so energized to just get on and start writing our response that we often neglect this part. Okay, so you need to make sure that you're using things like your colon, your semicolon, hyphens, parentheses, ellipses, all of those quite important forms of punctuation that also is making your writing quite sophisticated and quite high level as well. Now if you're still a little bit unsure of how to start, below we're going to see a few different ideas that you could use for your headline, and again they're not going to be necessarily the best ones in the world, but as long as we're making sure that we're setting it out in the appropriate form for the exam, then that's absolutely fine. So here are the ones that I've came up with. Okay, so what is the point of homework? Nice simple headline that you can use. If you'd rather use it for a subheading, then that's absolutely fine as well, and the fact that we're using a rhetorical question in it as well is going to get us a few more marks. My second one, homework equals missing out on life. Now I've tried to use that as kind of a little play on the idea that a lot of the time we are given maths homework and use that equal symbol there, which again, it's not exactly the best headline in the world, but at least it's one to show us that we're writing in the appropriate form. And finally, homework is horrible and horrendous. And you can see there that we've got the alliteration of the two H letters in horrible and horrendous. And also doesn't hurt using a word like horrendous, which is considered more sophisticated vocabulary and might get you a few more marks in your response. Final thing to help you then, we have some possible sentence starters. So again, we're using things like our discourse markers in the first example. Firstly, this is a deeply controversial issue, and I've used my ellipses because that is just indicating that's where you can go on and start adding your own ideas. The second one then, homework is better and more beneficial when. So have a think about the types of homework that you might have been given. Does your teacher actually plan it out? Is there actual point behind it, or do they just throw worksheets at you? Which as a teacher I do know that is sometimes the case, unfortunately. And the final one, I believe strongly that homework can be useful, however, and you can see there I've also used another discourse marker in however, and that's to indicate that the next point I'm going to make is going to contradict the last sentence and actually say that, you know, homework might be useful, but here's a negative aspect to it as well. And finally, here's my teacher's top tip for this writing question. Remember that discourse markers are a good way to help structure and control the direction of your writing. Okay, so they're really important because they're easy ways to get yourself some marks, but they're also very important when we just consider how we're structuring our writing as well. If you need any additional support or help, then new videos will be added every single week. We're going to be doing a question 5 sample every week as well. So all of these are going to come from the past papers over the last 5 years or so, and we're just going to keep doing them. Okay, so it doesn't matter whether you write a full 5 paragraph response, or if you just have a go here or there and just get used to really approaching these questions. Any of that will be really beneficial just to getting you ready for the exam. If you can't find anything on our channel, then check out our partner channel, Bookworm Teaching. They'll have a load of different lessons on there and even more guidance and help for English as well. If you need anything, guys, please feel free to like and subscribe and leave us a comment, and I'll try to get back to you as soon as possible. All the best, and I hope you get on well with all your revision in the future.